It's an honor to be with you. I chuckled a little bit as James introduced me, lumping me in with the luminaries of Walt and Bill, but I appreciate the graciousness that he showed in painting me with a broad brush with them. I'm excited to be with you and tell you a little bit about what I understood my assignment to be, which was why the world needs real estate research, and about a little bit about the impact of the research that's been done at CRE. And then, as James was motivating, animate a little bit what I think the key questions are for real estate research for the next 40 years of MIT CRE. This is going to be a little bit autobiographical as I go through it, as I was thinking about how I see the real estate world and why I think it's so cool. I started to see shades of my own journey throughout research. So I'll talk a little bit about my time as a student here at MIT and the things that I learned and the projects that I've worked on. As I interact with real estate professionals, go to industry conferences, as I talk with real estate researchers, well, the thing that I'm struck with the most is how real estate is we get to have all the fun. And the reason we get to have all the fun is we get to care about anything. There is no stay in your lane when it's research, when it comes to real estate, because we need to understand the demand for space, because we need to understand the system of cities. We need to understand the built environment. We need to understand policy. And so consequently, that means that real estate as a field, but real estate research in particular, intersects with nearly everything else that's important in the world. So I took a stab at putting together such a Venn diagram, and I want to walk you through each of these. And I want to do several things. I want to point out the connection that's deep between real estate research and the research that CRE does, and each of these subfields of the world, these disciplines, these areas that are so important to think about. And then I want you to be thinking as we go through about people you know that have been doing this kind of research here at MIT, ways that you were exposed to this in class, research that you've seen coming out from CRE at the time. And my thesis is going to be that this is kind of the epicenter of a lot of this research. So let me start out with housing affordability here at the top right. This is a problem the world over and is an increasingly acute problem. And if you think about where that problem comes from, it highlights this multidisciplinary nature of real estate. If you want to understand housing affordability, you have to actually understand the guts of construction costs, materials, where they come from, supply chains, tariffs, imports, all of this sort of thing. You need to understand labor markets for construction. I have a former student when I was teaching at Berkeley, who is now faculty at the Wisconsin Real Estate Center, and he was showing that actually tighter immigration enforcement naturally pushes up construction costs, and he can show this in the data, that in the cities where there has been tighter immigration enforcement, you have had rising construction costs. So you need to understand construction costs. For housing affordability, you need to understand supply constraints. You need to understand NIMBYism and land use regulation. You need to understand CEQA regulations if you're building in California. You need to understand labor unions. Okay, so you need to understand supply constraints. If you're doing housing affordability, you need to understand demand. You need to understand incomes. Why is it that we have a large group of people that would love to buy homes in the United States, but can't seem to get on that initial ladder to do so? What's the right policy to support them? So you can see, just taking one of these little things and thinking about housing affordability, you need to think about all of these other disciplines in the world, all of these other fields of study. One fun thing about CRE and CRE sitting inside of DUSP and the School of Architecture is that we get to be urban economists. We get to think about urban design. And so moving clockwise to neighborhood revitalization, this is something I'm going to talk about later today, autobiographically, about some of my own research. We think about the design for cities, the design for space. What makes a neighborhood successful? What makes it have the vitality that we were just looking at in Manila, of a mixed-use neighborhood that everyone would want to live in and be a part of? So that allows us to integrate architecture and urban design, and to be thinking about what is it that makes a city walkable and vibrant? What is it that makes a city a place where you want to live? Do we want to have opportunity zone legislation? Do we want to have LIHTC credits? Are these the right way to be able to address a neighborhood that's slumping that we would like to recover? Banking is ground zero, or real estate is very integrally linked to banking. If you think about mortgage-backed securities, commercial mortgage-backed securities, if you think about the massive exposure that savings and loans and that lots of regional banks have to commercial real estate, when we think about policies that have to do with Fannie and Freddie, and how fintechs are competing with traditional brick and mortar banks that take deposits, and how they're able to use, for example, FHA, Ginnie Mae guarantees to be able to fund their lines of credit, to be able to do this kind of origination. Well, then you're ostensibly thinking about finance, but really at the guts of it, it's real estate finance and it's mortgage finance. So banking is part and parcel real estate, and to be able to finance land is one of the key original OG purposes of banking. Transportation and infrastructure, several themes here. One is that we're looking to people that do solid urban economics and real estate research to quantify the return on investment for infrastructure. That's kind of step one, is to show that it's worth it, to show that these large scale projects in roads and bridges and transit and all of this kind of infrastructure does in fact have social benefits that outweigh the social costs. If that's the case, then the next question is, how do we finance that? And so there have been innovative models that have come out of the kind of public finance that understands real estate, transportation, infrastructure, trying to do this. GSE FHA policy, I touched on this a little bit. Monetary policy is something that I've been working on a lot lately. If you think about the transmission of monetary policy, a lot of it goes through interest rates. The Fed changes interest rates. The Fed does quantitative easing that moves down the long end of the yield curve. That changes the cost of debt for people who are taking out long-term debt. What's the most classic form of long-term debt? It's a mortgage. It's a residential or it's a commercial mortgage. So thinking about how households are able to consume differently because monetary policy got tighter or looser, and how that's passing through to their debt service costs on a monthly basis because they have an adjustable rate mortgage, or they have a fixed rate mortgage that they've refinanced, or because they're going out and having a home purchase and they're affected by that interest rate. We think a lot about monetary policy transmission through the mortgage market. Remote work, again, this is where we get to have all the fun. We're not just staying in the lane of finance. Thinking about remote work and what that does to the office sector, and trying to figure out if the office sector is permanently impaired in a COVID world or if it's recovered. And there's great quotes that, the demise of New York City real estate has been written every decade. That story's been written and it just keeps coming back. And I heard on the radio this week that New York City leased office space is back up to pre-pandemic levels. So we can think about how changing production functions, changing work models change the demand for space. Maybe that changes the demand where we need data centers. We need, like Sarah was talking about, we need real estate that supports the cloud so that people can work offsite. Maybe that means that we need an incredible industrial sector of real estate so that we can do last mile logistics, and so that we can support people being able to work and get deliveries from home. Financial distress is something that I've thought a lot about as well. Being able to afford a real estate asset is an enormous undertaking for a corporation or for a household. And it's a collateralized debt. That means that there's going to be very severe consequences when that borrower can't make his or her payments, or its payments in the case of a corporation. And so when we think about financial distress, we think about bailouts, we think about the problem of rolling defaults, we think about a wave of mortgage refinancing that needs to happen in the hospitality sector, and how that's going to happen in the wake of COVID. We think about this financial distress. This is a real estate question ultimately. If you think about new models about how cities work, you think about artificial intelligence, you think about self-driving cars, you think about how that changes the structure of cities. That's a real estate question. And then of course, climate turns out to be real estate's kind of maybe its strongest case to be able to make right now for its benefit to society. And I think Sichi's been, her research has been such a great example of this. Understanding climate, both mitigation and adaptation, that is fundamentally a real estate question. We are thinking about that, whether we're thinking about that in the islands of the Pacific, long-term financial contracts that involve real estate, how we're going to think about where we settle, how we're going to think about the government policies that allow people to move right back into an area that seems to be chronically decimated by hurricanes. All of those kind of climate questions, where we go from here as humanity, ends up being a real estate question. So as I think about David and Walter and Todd and Bill and Sichi and Albert and all of the luminaries at CRE, I see shades of every single one of these intersecting Venn diagrams here. CRE has been important for me. It was my first job my first research job as a freshman in college. I got a job working for Henry Polakowski studying rent control in Cambridge. My job was he had a database of renovations that happened in Cambridge after the end of rent control in 1995. And the data, you would think from looking at this building permits database that these were all consequences of getting rid of rent control. And he was wanting to make that case that ending rent control in Cambridge triggered an investment boom. But the data looked a little bit fishy. And sure enough, I would drive around Cambridge that summer and find a ground floor gas station that was in an apartment building. And so it was listed as it was a residential renovation, but really had nothing to do with rent control. So to make the case credibly, we had to clean out the gas stations that were happening on the ground floor and just restrict that innovation, that investment to things that were really just happening because of rent control. Then later I did my doctoral studies here at MIT, and I ended up studying a lot of these subjects and continue to study these subjects. Financial distress has been something that animates me, thinking about low-income households and thinking about how households struggle, for example, during the financial crisis to pay back subprime mortgages. Housing affordability has been an important subject for me, thinking about rent control, and I continued to study rent control after that first moment as a research assistant for the Center for Real Estate. So as I think about this, I thought one useful thing to do would be to illustrate one such project that I've worked on that I think illustrates a lot of the different things that are here, a lot of the different intersections that happen when you're studying urban economics and real estate and when you get to study that at a place like MIT. So I'm going to tell you about a program that I piloted and studied and launched in Seattle with several co-authors, some of them here at MIT, some of them other places as well, called the Creating Moves to Opportunity Project. You might know about the Moving to Opportunity experiment that happened in the 1990s. This was with HUD, and they wanted to see if neighborhoods mattered and if moving people out of the projects into suburbia made a difference. And there were interesting early returns from that. It didn't seem like it was transformational for the adults that moved into those suburbs. What happened nearly 20 years later was researchers got the data on the kids that had moved out of the projects and what their adult lives were like. And it turns out that they were more likely to go to college, higher incomes, less likely to end up in jail, less likely to have teen pregnancies. Neighborhoods mattered, and in proportion to how long you spent in a so-called opportunity neighborhood. So that was the vision of the voucher program in the United States. Let's get rid of the projects. Let's housing projects that tend to be outside the city. They tend to be segregated racially, economically, and they tend to be underinvested in and undermaintained. Let's give people housing vouchers, and they can move wherever they see fit in the city, and they can make the choice that's best for them. Now, when you look at the data, 80%, 90% in a typical city of housing vouchers are used in what we would call low opportunity, high poverty neighborhoods. So what happened to the promise of now you have a voucher, now you can go anywhere you want? Well, there's a couple of things that could be going on, and we set out to study this. This matters. So here's the geography of Seattle, which is where we did this first pilot study. It's since been replicated in 20 cities across the country. And this is the geography of Seattle. Blue areas are areas where growing up poor is better in terms of your adult income than growing up in red areas. So you can see that even in nearby neighborhoods, there's a big difference in opportunity. All this data is all conditioned on growing up with parents who earn around the 25th percentile of income, $27,000 a year annually. So even fixing your household income, it's better to grow up in some neighborhoods than others. And it's not just that it's great to live in Bellevue, and it's great to live near the Bezoses and the Gateses. It's even true that within very tight radii, it's better to live in some neighborhoods than others. So we have a little bit of data about why this is. It's largely what you would expect. It turns out that going to good schools is very valuable. It's also useful if there's a higher fraction of two-parent households around you, even if your own family is not a two-parent household. Being racially segregated is a negative predictor of your future outcomes growing up. So we wanted to see, what does the voucher program have to say with this? And it turns out that, like I was saying, most of the top voucher locations in the Seattle metro area are in red areas, not in blue areas. And so we want to understand why that was the case and if there was something that could be done. And I'll tell you that we stepped back and had a little bit of humility at this point. And we said, well, it's a little bit cruel of us to say, you know, you should all move to the blue areas. First of all, if the blue areas are much more expensive. But it turns out that even within a level of rent, there's a really big spread in the what we would call the quality of that neighborhood, how the opportunity score of that neighborhood. So even if you fix a 2-bedroom rent to be $1,500 or even $1,000, let's stick with $1,000, there's still a big spread, and you could still have much higher expected outcomes for your children if you lived in some neighborhoods than others. So then a question was, well, okay, but this is what we think is important. Is it possible that other people are like, well, that's great, academics, ivory tower, you measured one attribute of a neighborhood. Neighborhoods have a lot of characteristics. And it turns out that even though you think I live in a crummy neighborhood, I happen to like my neighborhood. I have a preference to be here because my family is here, because my mosque is here. The grocery store that I like is here. My job is near here. I happen to like this neighborhood. So even though I understand research shows that there are some aspects of it that will be good for my kids, if I moved elsewhere, I want to stay here. Or is it that actually a lot of these families would love to move with their children to an opportunity neighborhood, which again, by the way, is sometimes very close by and similar affordability level, but they're prevented from doing so because there's barriers. Those barriers could be search frictions. It's hard for them to find the apartments in the opportunity neighborhoods. It could be that landlords discriminate or landlords make it onerous for them to go there. They might not know about how to do it. They might not know people in that neighborhood. They might need introductions. And so what we set out to do is to design a program that would reduce some barriers. If it didn't make a difference, we were going to conclude that either we hadn't solved the barriers, or maybe more likely that people just wanted to live in those neighborhoods and we should really back off and stop social engineering, right? But if we could figure out a way to reduce barriers and then people wanted to take advantage of this new opportunity by moving to opportunity, then we would find that to be a valuable thing to roll out. So here's the program we designed. It had 3 pillars. We helped people on their search side. We basically helped them with like a kind of a social worker, rental broker who would talk them through their housing search process, talk them through putting in applications for apartments. We worked with landlords to tell them about the program and the ambitions and the hopes and the dreams of the people in our program. We also reduced a lot of the bureaucracy from working with a local public housing authority in terms of streamlining inspections and things like that. And then we made sure that there wasn't any kind of immediate short-term liquidity need that was going to prevent you from not being able to afford a moving truck or a security deposit or something like this. All told, that ended up being about $2,600 per family that was issued a voucher, which is around 2% of the total cost of a voucher over a typical 7-year lifetime. So not large in proportional terms. And then, of course, you weren't required to move to opportunity areas. What happened is the control group got the regular voucher and the treatment group was offered these services and these supports that were designed to help them, but obviously not force them if they so choose that they wanted to move to an opportunity neighborhood. The population we're working with is quite financially distressed in terms of the percent that are homeless or that are dissatisfied with their current neighborhood, or the 50% unemployment rate almost. And to be eligible, you had to have a child that was under the age of 15, because that was what had been shown from the moving to opportunity research, that those kids were gonna live in their new neighborhood for long enough. The control group that got the standard voucher as usual, around 15% of them moved to an opportunity neighborhood, which was in line with historical baseline data. And then for the treatment group that got these supports and the offer, if they were interested in moving to opportunity, over 50% of them moved to an opportunity neighborhood. This is the largest effect I've ever seen in social sciences, and was just thrilling. We interviewed them afterwards to figure out, was this you just feel like your arm was twisted and you were told, fine, if you want me to move to a pink house, I'll move to a pink house, just stop bugging me. And people felt like it was transformational for them and for their children. They felt a lot of hope for the future. And so on the back of this, we were able to roll it out with Congress's then support. We'll see how things go in the future, and try this out in 20 different cities. Most cities are more segregated than Seattle. Seattle's a relatively young city, and we were thrilled to find out that this actually replicated across the cities that we tried it in and had a robustly positive effect. So people moved much more into the opportunity neighborhoods. What do we learn from this? Neighborhoods matter. This took a lot of modern data, right, to be able to figure out on a tract by tract basis, where do kids that grew up poor do better than in other places? And we were able to uncover a lot of neighborhood success stories. But supporting low-income families and being able to get to those opportunity neighborhoods was not just a simple data exercise. It required developing this careful program. There's a lot of frictions that inhibit mobility. We learned that the barriers are apparently a very important part of this, and we had an urban economics model that we hope did Bill proud that talked through a lot of this in our paper. But these obstacles and these barriers are solvable, and you can have dramatic effects as we do that. We can make this social safety net work smarter. Okay, so with my last minute or two, what I want to do is talk about the next 40 years. Kind of tried to illustrate a project that tied into real estate finance, it tied into the demand for space, it tied into the development of low-income housing, obviously with policy. How about the next 40 years? Where are we headed? So I think number one is going to be what kind of policies and practices, real estate policies and practices can help us mitigate and adapt to climate change. What costs can be reduced so that we can continue to have robust, or actually start having robust growth in housing supply in our most productive cities, and kind of undo the spatial mismatch by building where people want to live. How will the urban form adapt to the new world? Are we going to be able to sprawl out more? Is there going to be more demand for agglomeration? What's that going to look like? We've had a surge in homelessness recently. How can policy address this? Thinking about investments in infrastructure, we kind of have a chronic need to revitalize our infrastructure investments here in the United States and globally as well. How much should the government be involved in the mortgage market? There was an implicit guarantee for Fannie and Freddie. It became explicit when Fannie and Freddie entered conservatorship. How is that going to play out, and what is the mortgage market of the future going to look like? We know a little bit about mobility policies that can help low-income families move them from one place to another. That's hard to do at scale. And so thinking about what the right policy is for the future to revitalize neighborhoods is important. And then a global problem right now, and something that I've been interested in the past year a lot, is thinking about declining fertility and how the role of housing in that. When you survey a lot of people that are delaying household formation and delaying having kids, they want to own a home first. And that's true in Brazil, that's true in Korea, that's true in the United States. So we need to understand that as well. So wrapping up, safety, productivity, innovation, those are all products of their built environment. And so are their duals, the negatives of poverty, pollution, revolution, and famine. So we need to understand real estate so that we can help this. Government intervention is needed where there are externalities, and the built environment, the physical space that we deal with in real estate research and urban economics, these are places where there are spillovers, absolutely. And so it's a place where policy has an acute need to be informed. Real estate research touches us locally and globally, and you can count on MIT CRE to be at the center of all of that over the next 40 years. Thank you.